under the rule of King Cyrus the Great, conquered Babylon and made a decree that rocked the Jewish world. Historians still argue whether Cyrus truly believed in the God of Israel, or was just doing this to consolidate power.
Now that we've covered Cyrus the Great, let's step into the tricky territory of whether he was a divine instrument or simply a political genius.
Yet, in the book of Isaiah, God refers to Cyrus as his anointed. This raises a fascinating question.
But there's an interesting twist to the story. Historians still debate whether Cyrus truly believed he was working under divine guidance.
But, as with many prophetic texts, the interpretations are murky. Historians and scholars still argue over. There's an open debate, though, about what happened after the rise of Persia. Daniel's vision of a ram is followed by the image of a goat with a prominent horn. There's an open debate, though, about what happened after the rise of Persia. Daniel's vision of a ram is followed by the image of a goat with a prominent horn. The quirky tidbit: the ram imagery in Persian culture was powerful and revered. In fact, rams were often depicted in Persian.
Now, let's turn our attention to Persia's decline, an event that still raises some interesting questions about prophecy and fulfillment.
Some believe that Persia's decline is part of God's larger plan, already written out in Scripture.
Here's an interesting tidbit. While the Bible doesn't give an explicit timeline for Persia's decline, the fall of
Historians argue whether Persia's downfall was as sudden and definitive as it seems in the Scriptures. Could
Persia's prophetic role in the book of Daniel? Let us now take a closer look at the role of Persia in the prophetic visions of the book of Daniel. In one of the most famous passages, Daniel describes a dream about 4 beasts, which represent 4 great kingdoms. The third beast, a ram with 2 horns, is interpreted by Daniel as the Persian Empire. One horn is larger than the other, symbolizing the rise of the Medes before the Persians. It's a fascinating moment of prophecy. Persia, depicted as this mighty ram, charges across the land, pushing to the west, north, and south. But, as with many prophetic texts, the interpretations are murky. Historians and scholars still argue over how literally or symbolically we should read these visions. Some scholars claim that the ram's power was meant to reflect the dominance of Persia, while others believe the vision speaks to more spiritual truths, hinting at the empire's ultimate vulnerability to its own internal decay. In any case, the ram's bold actions in the vision signal Persia's military expansion, which is precisely what happened historically. The Persian Empire, under Cyrus and his successors, went on to conquer Babylon and spread its influence across the ancient world. There's an open debate, though, about what happened after the rise of Persia. Daniel's vision of a ram is followed by the image of a goat with a prominent horn, a symbol of Greece and its future conquest of Persia. It's here that the story of Persia takes a fascinating twist. After the ram's dominance, the Greek Empire under Alexander the Great swiftly brought the Persians to their knees. Some view this as a literal fulfillment of the prophecy, while others suggest it's more symbolic of the cyclical rise and fall of empires throughout history. The quirky tidbit: the ram imagery in Persian culture was powerful and revered. In fact, rams were often depicted in Persian art and architecture as symbols of strength and fertility. It's interesting that this symbol is adopted in Daniel's prophecy. And it hints at how cultures can leave lasting legacies through art and religion, even in ways that influence sacred texts. The mystery of Persia's decline, a lost prophecy? Now, let us turn our attention to Persia's decline, an event that still raises some interesting questions about prophecy and fulfillment. When we think of Persia, we tend to think of the height of its power under Cyrus and his successors. But by the time of Alexander the Great, the once mighty Persian Empire had crumbled. The ancient scriptures are full of prophecy about great empires rising and falling, but Persia's decline leaves a rather curious gap in biblical prophecy. Why was there no strong foretelling of the fall of Persia? Was it because its downfall was inevitable, or is it a missing piece of prophecy that has yet to be understood? Some believe that Persia's decline is part of God's larger plan, already written out in Scripture. The book of Daniel, after all, describes the kingdom of Persia as being eventually overtaken by Greece. The transition from the ram to the goat symbolized not only the military supremacy of Greece but also a change in the way nations operated and viewed power. Still, the lack of explicit details about the fall of Persia within the Bible remains a topic of debate. Some theologians suggest that the prophecy might have been more focused on Persia's role in the salvation of Israel, and thus its fall was merely a secondary event in the greater divine narrative. Historians argue whether Persia's downfall was as sudden and definitive as it seems in the scriptures. Could Persia have survived had it not been for internal corruption and external pressure from Greece? Some scholars argue that if the Persians had better leadership in the later years, they might have adapted and survived, much like the Romans did when they faced internal decay and external threats. But the biblical narrative and historical record seem to paint Persia as a fading power, its moment in the divine spotlight now past. Here's an interesting tidbit: while the Bible doesn't give an explicit timeline for Persia's decline, the fall of the Persian Empire was incredibly swift in the context of ancient history. Within just a few years of Alexander's conquest, Persia was no longer the dominating empire in the region, and many of its former lands were absorbed into the Greek Empire. The speed of this transition makes one wonder if there was something divinely orchestrated about the collapse of such a grand empire. Iran's current role and prophetic interpretations. Finally, let's take a look at how Iran today connects with its ancient past, especially through the lens of biblical prophecy. The Persian Empire may have faded long ago, but the modern nation of Iran carries a significant legacy that resonates with many of the same themes found in the scriptures. Some scholars and prophecy enthusiasts believe that Iran's current role in the Middle East and its historical connection to ancient Persia may play a pivotal part in future biblical events. For example, many prophetic interpretations point to the role of Iran in the end times, particularly in relation to the famous prophecy of Ezekiel 38, where a powerful nation from the east, often identified as Persia, is said to rise up in the final days and bring great conflict. The modern interpretation of Persia as Iran seems almost too perfect of a match, considering its position in the Middle East and its historically complex relationship with Israel. Some say that the prophecy is already unfolding, while others caution that these interpretations might be overreaching. Historians continue to debate how relevant ancient prophecies are to modern geopolitics. Does the rise of Iran as a regional power mean that biblical predictions are on the verge of fulfillment, or are we simply applying ancient texts to contemporary events? The debate rages on, with many scholars arguing that the language of biblical prophecy is intentionally vague, allowing for multiple interpretations based on the reader's worldview. It's a fascinating blend of history, religion, and politics, one that keeps scholars, theologians, and historians pondering the ancient connections between Persia and today's Iran. And let's throw in a quirky tidbit. Did you know that some of Iran's modern leaders openly reference the ancient Persian Empire as a symbol of national pride? The link between ancient Persia's grandeur and the modern Iranian state is a point of deep cultural significance. In many ways, the Persians of today continue to draw on their heritage, not only for identity, but also to assert their place in the world, a world that, according to some, is still very much connected to ancient biblical prophecy. So, what does all this mean for Iran's future? Will it fulfill its prophetic destiny, or will it, like many other great empires, fade into the history books? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: the connection between Iran and biblical prophecy remains one of the most intriguing and debated aspects of ancient and modern history.